Why don't you kick it off? Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and bring us to where you're at today?
Sure. I've been with EisnerAmper for the past 18 months. Prior to that, I was at Deloitte as part of the blockchain team, led what's called the Blockchain Lab, which was really R&D. We did a lot of POCs across various industries, healthcare, financial services, manufacturing, energy, I mean, you name it. Prior to that, I was at Accenture for several years, and that's where I kind of fell into the space by accident in 2014. And prior to that, I was a TradFi guy on the sell side for about 20 years.
Let's get into the digital side. What's your crypto story?
So my crypto story is when I was at Accenture, I was asked by one of the managing directors what I knew about blockchain, not Bitcoin, but blockchain.
Yeah.
And of course, the answer was it underpinned Bitcoin, which was more of a question than a statement. Well, I just had a very uncomfortable client conversation who said, thanks for the Bitcoin presentation, but we wanted a blockchain presentation. So she asked me to start looking into it, which I did. And when I started reading about the technology, I mean, it hit me like a lightning bolt. Even though I don't have a comp sci background, I could see the transformative nature of this technology, especially within financial services over time. And so I started writing opinion pieces and putting decks together for the managing directors, thinking at some point, they're going to need something to bring to their clients. Well, little did I know that wave was about to hit the beach. And as all these, major financial services institutions around the world started asking for input, it became my full-time job. So that was sort of the beginning of my journey, and it's been my full-time job ever since.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's great. So you go from Accenture to Deloitte and kind of applying the same type of philosophy and kind of what you learned from there. What kind of breakthroughs did you have at Deloitte and kind of where things were kind of developing from a blockchain perspective, separate from Bitcoin?
Well, back then, and even still today, there was a lot of excitement across a bunch of different verticals around what this technology could do in terms of addressing things like reconciliation challenges, right? Where can we make things more efficient? Where can we make them better? To be honest, those were really interesting pieces of work, but they've been slow to be adopted. And some of the challenges with that are, number one, at the time, most of these POCs were permissioned blockchains, which are arguably somewhat limited in terms of value. But the other thing that we discovered is that data standards is really critical. So if you don't have data standards across the entire ecosystem, then it becomes just an increase in technical debt as opposed to shifting the cost curve to something that's much more efficient.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I guess going from there to where you're at today, I'd love to hear kind of what you're focused on today, what you're working on, and what your clients are telling you, and what the what conversation has been to this point.
Sure. So EisnerAmper, most people that know Eisner know them primarily as an accounting firm, tax accounting, audit. But honestly, the growth in the firm over the last 3 years has just been tremendous. And actually, our service lines extend into a lot of other areas across risk, compliance, forensics, bankruptcy, both in terms of mediation and administration. We do outsourced CFO services, outsourced HR services, much more of a traditional consulting model, if you will. And so when I joined the firm, this was really nobody's swim lane, if you will. And so my role has been to try to create that service line, adjust our go-to-market strategy to address the broader digital asset space and not just the financial services, meaning funds and high net worth that are involved in crypto. So we're now servicing different companies, DAO foundations, digital asset managers that are looking for different licenses to try to comply with what they think is going to be the future of the SEC rules and FINRA rules. We're also doing a lot of forensics work, believe it or not, some of that's matrimonial, but also for regulators. And then advisory. So for example, we have a DAO that we're working with that wants to take that DAO and move it offshore. But how do you do that when you've already issued tokens in the US? And how do you make that move without creating regulatory challenges with both the SEC and the IRS. So we bring in our international tax and compliance experts to try to give them a solution that is going to do that in a cost and time efficient manner.
That's pretty interesting. So bringing all different facets, it's not just like, as you mentioned, fund specific, but there's a lot of different nuances across process, types of structures that you're focused on, which is pretty fascinating.
The way I put it is this: there are a lot of mature companies out there in this space. Don't get me wrong, but there are a lot of relatively immature companies that need to take that next step to further legitimize themselves in terms of, raising money, filing for licenses, and how do you do that in a manner that is not only compliant but also palatable to the investors that you're trying to raise money from to get your solution, to a mature state. And so that's, I think, where we really help the bulk of our clients in terms of business model, controls, compliance, things like that. Because a lot of these companies, as you guys are well aware, they were startups at one point, right? And the growth can be pretty meteoric, but that means that a lot of things that a more mature company would be thinking about had largely been either not thought about well, or thought through well, and now they need to sort of grow into that next phase.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Are you guys working with like token issuers too, like the institutions that are actually issuing tokens? If that makes sense.
So as it relates to our token work, typically we don't do the tokenization, obviously. But what we will do is, again, from an advisory side, talk to them about, okay, here are your options in terms of some of the service providers that you might want to think about in terms of your token creation. But we'll work with their attorneys at the same time. And believe me, they need attorneys to understand how these tokens are going to operate and which regulators are going to be taking a look at that token, right? So again, that goes back more to the business advisory side. And then in terms of actual service, again, compliance, tax, accounting, et cetera.
Very cool. Well, Chris, why don't you tell us about the in terms of like the U.S. regulatory environment? Kind of where do we stand today?
I think the biggest problem in the US is the fractured nature of our regulatory environment, right? We have multiple regulators with different mandates who are all trying to figure out, what is their role, what's their turf. And there are obviously turf battles between the SEC and the CFTC. And it's very, very difficult to understand in many cases what is the regulatory environment. A lot of frustration in this space with the SEC, because to date, their regulatory stance is that all crypto except Bitcoin and now maybe Ethereum are considered securities. So come on in and register. Well, it's not quite that simple, because the securities laws that we have today around registration were not built for this, new type of asset class. So for example, if you have a DAO, crypto or token, whatever you want to call it, you're going to register that. But how do you do that when you start to look at the things that you have to supply to the SEC around background checks on management? Well, in theory, a DAO has no management. So help us understand. But the SEC has not been forthcoming, in my opinion, in working with the industry to try to solve some of these problems. Instead, it's enforcement. And the problem with enforcement is it not only takes time and money, but you can get different opinions from different courts, and courts have a tendency to overturn one another. So where do you go? There's if you want to look at kind of a tongue-in-cheek situation, or not situation, but view of this, there is on the SEC website, something was penned a while ago around the shapeshift decision, and it's, as the crypto world turns, and it's sort of this fake back and forth between an issuer and an SEC official who, this person is saying, well, we have questions. We'll go talk to your attorney. Well, my attorney has questions too. Well, just register. Like, how do you do that? So we have these large enforcement actions, and now we're starting to see folks like Coinbase proactively sue the SEC for the information that they think they want. If they're saying, we want to comply, you have to tell us how, and we're not getting the how. And of course, the whole thing is now kind of up in the air with the election, and we'll see what the nature of the SEC and the CFTC look like going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Regulatory clarity is definitely crucial. This
Right.
regulation by enforcement is a big problem. It puts the U.S. at a competitive disadvantage too, right?
Right. And so you're seeing lots of folks who say, I'm just not going to get anywhere near the US.
That's right.
Right. Whereas if you look at the MiCA law in the EU, and I'm not saying it's perfect by any stretch of the imagination, there are going to be challenges with that implementation, but at least it's a single regulatory authority that's trying to address a bunch of the issues that the folks here in the US are wrestling with.
Yeah, something they can at least hang their hat on, that this is something that's been put forth from a regulation point of view that we can at least follow as a framework. Today we were
Right.
with framework, right? Yeah.
Right. To try to make the markets, investor protection, mature markets, security, all those things. But one of the challenges that you're going to have in Europe is the laws by each country that have to be enacted to underpin that regulation. And that's going to be adopted kind of unevenly. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens, who's able to comply. It's going to take time.
Yeah. Do you foresee anything like this happening in the US, or is it kind of just wait and see till after the election type thing?
Well, I don't see that happening in the US again, because we have different regulatory bodies that have different mandates. So for example, if people look at the SEC and they say, okay, right now they're regulating through enforcement, and it seems like their focus is on investor protection, which is one of their pillars. But their other pillars or mandates are capital formation and efficient markets. And we haven't seen any of that being addressed. Maybe they feel like, well, investor protection and securities law compliance is the first pillar that we need to tackle. I don't know. I don't know what's going through their heads, but they need to get through that. And then people talk about the election. I mean, yeah, Trump is largely viewed as more pro crypto than Harris. So let's just take that at face value. It doesn't mean that on day one, should Trump win, that all of a sudden we're going to have this very pro crypto SEC. First of all, it's going to take time to get a new chairperson in place, and that's going to take months. And then secondly, let's not forget that person has to be confirmed by the Senate. So just as much, in my opinion, is riding on the outcome of the Senate elections as it is the presidential elections. And then even once we get through all of that, the mandates of the SEC and CFTC have not changed. So unless Congress is willing to change the laws wholesale, I don't think we're going to see a seismic shift. Maybe we'll see a more friendly regulatory environment under either one of those administrations. Maybe we'll see commissioners who are more open to at least engaging in dialogue with the industry to understand what the challenges are. I mean, that's my hope, but I just don't want to be disappointed.
Totally understand. Yep. We're all kind of just waiting to see what happens, right? That's a great point too about the Senate, because that is definitely the crucial underpinning of what would happen once whoever takes office going forward here.
Yeah, I was on a call recently with a law firm. They were talking about the future of the regulatory environment, and what they were pointing out is that forget about crypto. Let's just look at the transition in some of these different agencies from the time that someone's nominated to the time that they're appointed. If all goes well, can take 4 to 5 months.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Right. So now look at the way I look at it is, okay, so now we have a very, divided Senate, either way, no matter who controls it, and you have a person who is stepping into an area that is, very controversial, So does that lengthen the timeline? I don't know. I'm not a Washington guy and I'm not a prognosticator, but I would be willing to bet that it will be something of a fight.
It's a really good point. I mean, the way you're breaking it down, it's there's no way anything getting done in the next 6 months.
Right.
Yeah. Status quo.
Yeah. And people, they had high hopes to get Fit 21 through, but that's not going to happen. It got through the House by a wide margin, by the way, which is a little surprising to me. I thought it would be a little narrower, but there's just no time. So unless that bill gets attached to something else, like, national defense funding, which is a must pass bill, and, it happens every year, and people try to tag things on there, will we see an effort for that to happen? And then what? So
Yeah.
the whole thing is a hot mess.
Yeah, and obviously you have your clients asking you for, kind of where things are going, and just like you said, it's a wait and see approach, and you're just trying to be able to look around the corners potentially to see any potential pitfalls, but it's obviously a challenge given.
Right. But at the same time, people are moving forward.
That's right.
And unfortunately, more often than not, they're choosing jurisdictions outside the U.S. in order to operate their businesses, and I understand why.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's circle back to the topic of tokenization, because I know we briefly brought that up, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. You're talking to two former TradFi guys as well, been in the space, both on the operations side, with funds, in the industry. Love to hear kind of your thoughts. Obviously, everybody talks about liquidity as the main all be all, but obviously that's not proven yet. The markets are still evolving. Love to hear kind of your thoughts on where do you see tokenization going? What are the best benefits, or I guess a lot of benefits that you see kind of going forward outside of liquidity?
Right. So, for years, people would say, "Oh, we're going to tokenize this real world asset, and it's going to become more liquid."
Right.
And I would say, "Really? Okay, let's just break that down and think about that for a minute." If you're talking about private assets, right, where you have to have a qualified investor. Well, those rules haven't changed. So you still have to onboard those people. And then if you're going to create liquidity, you have to have a pool of buyers who are willing to buy that. And they all have to be vetted. So that's challenge number one. Challenge number two is, where is that thing going to trade? Right? Historically, many of these private assets were literally private, and the deals to try to sell or sell your stake to another investor were very bespoke. It was truly OTC. Let's get the lawyers to draw up some papers and we'll make this happen. Very inefficient. And I understand completely why people look at the idea of tokenization as a means to make that better. But there are a lot of building blocks that we still have to get past before that vision can be realized. Having said that, tokenization of things like funds has proven to be very, very beneficial. So I don't know if you guys were at the Real World Asset Summit recently in New York, but one of the major financial institutions who's tokenized a fund talked about the cost of transfer agency, moving from one investor to another. And he said that the cost of that particular fund went down from like $50,000 to $1.50, literally.
That's huge.
So, right. So right now in the tokenization space, TradFi is looking for places where it makes sense in things like money market funds, collateral management, all these places where we have huge reconciliation challenges that can be solved by tokenizing instead of the traditional rails that we have today.
Yeah, when you think of, Chris, obviously the market, the industry moving to a T+1, and that's been problematic.
Right.
And you look at, was it Hamilton Lane that tokenized their mutual fund? That's a daily NAV mutual fund. And their question is why it's already liquid. Well, they can reconcile and settle on T in real time, right?
Right.
This is a huge deal.
Right.
Yeah.
But you still have the intermediary there.
That's right. That's right.
You still have the backstop of protection should something go wrong. In theory, someone can go in and change or fix transactions that maybe happened erroneously.
That's right.
Because people still make mistakes. People still have to punch into some machine what it is they want to do. And as TradFi guys, we all know how easy it is to fat finger something, right?
Yeah, insurance is not going away anytime soon, right? They'll be there for a good amount of time.
Right. But I look at tokenization today, and again through the TradFi lens for financial services, as the next form of dematerialization. And for those who are listening to this that are too young to remember, we have something called the Depository Trust Clearing Corporation that was created by the banks back in the 60s and early 70s in order to solve for the crush of paper that they were having to deal with in their trading operations, right? And we look at it today and say, wow, this is great. We have this thing, this DTCC, but guess what? That didn't happen overnight. That took many years to get everybody on board. And I think the same thing is going to be true here. I'm not saying it's going to take 10 years, but again, we're really in the very early innings of this thing. And there are a lot of things that have to be thought about in terms of who are those intermediaries, which ones are going to be diminished, what roles are going to go away, what new roles are going to come up. So for example, we have the role of a transfer agent, right? That middle party to move the asset from one person to another. Well, in the tokenized world, what is that role?
It's a great question. Yeah.
Right.
Partly smart
And people
contract.
are trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
So it sounds like from your perspective, Chris, maybe some of the biggest innovations in terms of tokenization are on the back office side.
So far, I think so. It's most of the efforts that we've seen in this space, with the exception of the crypto ETFs, has been cost lift out of the TradFi sector, right? Being able to move money, say cross border, in a much more efficient manner at a much lower cost. So you've got Onyx, Canton, there's a couple of them out there. In terms of new products, really the only new products that we've seen are the tokenized money market funds and the ETFs. But I think over time that will happen. And to go back to what I said earlier about my time at Accenture and talking to the large banks, the message was then and is still now that the thing that is going to drive this, a lot of this, is not just cost, but investor demand. When the investors or customers are starting to demand from their financial service provider, whether it's a broker or a bank, hey, this is what I want to do, that's when they'll really start to get on board. So, for example, my financial advisor is a large, major, top 10 firm in New York, and they still have a no solicitation on crypto ETFs, as most of them do. Over time, that will change.
Yeah. Eventually.
I don't want to take us too far down the rabbit hole, but Chris, the one thing I thought you said was really interesting is you said the transfer agent services for company you were talking about dropped from whatever was $50K a year, a month, to down to almost nothing. Try not to go too far down the rabbit hole, but could you kind of give us some insight into that, kind of what happened there?
Yeah, it's not mine, and this person talked about it up on stage and very briefly, but what he was talking about was the amount of time and money required to reconcile the transfer of those assets from one client to another went down precipitously because they're using a blockchain. And so you don't have all of these people in the middle having to hand things off one person to another. And so again, that's always been the promise of blockchain, right? That we could do this in a cryptographically secure way that will allow things to move much more quickly at much lower cost. The challenge is, because it's a blockchain, and if it's not a permissioned environment, what happens when something goes wrong, right? And so the thing that I kind of wonder is, in the permissionless world, is the SEC and the CFTC looking at this as we're just building new contagion rails?
Yeah, that's an interesting point.
Or things start to snowball, how do you stop it? And by the way, crypto is 24/7. It never sleeps.
Right.
So you could wake up tomorrow and find out that your Bitcoin is worth $10,000.
Yeah. Hopefully not.
I don't think we will, but you know what I'm saying. It's like things can, can happen, and you just have no way of controlling it. There's no circuit breakers. There's no way to stop it.
Yeah, so to me, kind of what you're saying, having good, obviously what we've known in the TradFi space of having good compliance, KYC is all relevant. That's not going away. It's just building that infrastructure into a new technology ecosystem. Is
Correct.
that correct? Yeah.
Correct. That's the way I view it. And again, we're not there yet. And as you guys can tell, I'm by no means a crypto libertarian. Crypto is here to stay. I don't think it's going away anytime soon. I'm not negative crypto. So just want to make that clear. But I do think that the larger opportunity is in the tokenization of real world assets, traditional securities, traditional financial instruments, traditional assets. So that can also cut across real estate and a whole bunch of other things.
Where do you see kind of the biggest path to adoption? Obviously, real estate's been a pretty prominent on the tokenization side. What other types of real world assets do you see?
Well, I think that within the securities markets, we do have areas like collateral management and certain funds that lend themselves to this technology. There are a lot of other areas people talk about it, using it for traditional equities. Well, you know what? That market is not great in terms of middle and back office, and it's hugely expensive, but it kind of works, right? So if you're a large financial institution, why are you going to spend potentially millions, tens of millions, whatever the number is, to try to change that? You start on the less liquid stuff and you learn your lessons there. Whereas if you get burned, it's going to hurt, but it's not going to kill you.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Once you go liquid, it's basically you're kind of all in.
Yeah. All your chips are in. You better hope you work. And I think the Australian Stock Exchange found that out. They were one of the early adopters. Their system, middle back office system, is called Chess. It was kind of coming to end of life. They were looking for what are we going to do? And they tried to get this blockchain solution up and running, but they just ran into too many challenges, not with the technology, but with the users, with the people in their ecosystem who were pushing back on, the technical needs. How is this going to work, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the thing that they had going for them is that their ecosystem is largely under one roof. Whereas, again, ours is fractured with, the CSDs, the brokers, the custodians, the transfer agents, all the people that live in the ecosystem now. How do we get all those things in harmony? And everybody is playing defense right now in that world, right? They don't want to be disintermediated into oblivion.
Yeah, 100%. Chris, one other thing I wanted to talk to you about in particular was the ERC 3643. Could you give us kind of high-level synopsis of that?
Sure. So for folks that don't know, ERC 3643 is a token project that basically has smart contract functionality that embeds a lot of the compliance functions directly into the token around things like investor qualifications, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not saying that that's going to be the standard or that it's the best solution, but what I am saying is interesting is the fact that you have people thinking through these TradFi problems and how can we leverage the technology to make things better, faster, stronger. And that's really what we need.
And so the use case is basically kind of like AML KYC,
correct?
For these users. Is that correct? So maybe so you kind of know who's on the other, or not necessarily know who's on the other side, but you're not dealing with a bad actor per se.
Well, a bad actor or someone who's unqualified. We have rules, Reg A, Reg D around who's allowed to buy these things, and if you're able to digitally prove your cred, then you can participate. But if you can't, then the smart contract will automatically make sure that that transfer or that transaction doesn't happen.
It's built in the code of the smart contract from that token
Correct.
standard. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's your point out there too, right? That we've seen. But yeah, that one is obviously building the compliance function in the actual code.
And as I always like to say, smart contracts are neither smart nor contracts. What we're really talking about is automated business logic.
Yeah. Programmatic decision making at scale, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's very interesting. Yeah. And that creates a whole nother set of, expertise and people that you need to understand how to go about doing that as well, right?
Right. And that's one of the challenges that everybody in the industry, TradFi industry, is facing is how do we upskill our employees to be able to operate in this environment? And by the way, these challenges, this is not new. I mean, those of us that were around during the internet boom remember a lot of the same challenges around upskilling people. What were the regulatory rules going to be? And back then, you had internet companies and non-internet companies. And today, everybody's an internet company or they're dead.
That's right.
Right. And so over time, I think at least it'll start with financial services, but eventually I think most industries will have some sort of blockchain functionality that's underpinning what it is that they do. And it's, as I always, my mom always says, can you please explain this to me? And I keep telling her, Mom, forget it. You don't need to know. But what you do need to know is that things will get better, faster, stronger. And in many cases, it's a blockchain solution that's running in the background that's making that happen.
Absolutely. So I guess you brought up a couple of good, interesting things. So the upskilling obviously is a big component of everybody's, awareness and thought process going forward. Obviously, you're focused at Eisner on that aspect of, consulting with clients. As a firm, what are you guys seeing? What's that path look like for you guys?
Yeah. So for us, our upskilling capabilities are really around people who can code this stuff. Number one, on the technology advisory side, and then on what I call the traditional operations side is having people that understand how this stuff works and how they can create the accounting books and records and tax returns and all those other things that for the assets that are being underpinned by this technology. And it's not a huge leap, but it's just a slightly different skill set. And so, and again, that takes time.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely, especially in the financial services industry, right? It's always hard to find new talent in general. Now you have benefit of layer on top of it.
Right.
To find that unique skill set, it can be a challenge, right? For sure.
It can be a challenge. Yes, it can.
Cool. And anything else you're seeing out there, Chris, that you want to talk about?
Again, I just from what I've seen, one of the interesting things is we've had a number of companies that are crypto native or crypto adjacent, and this goes back to what I said earlier about what I call the picks and shovels in the space, the service providers, and they'll come to us and they'll say we want an audit, and so the first question is why do you want that audit? And it usually falls into one of two categories. They're raising money or they're looking for some sort of license and they need an unqualified or clean audit. The problem is, and it's kind of surprising how big some of these companies are, they're not even close to being ready for an audit. And that's because they don't have the things that I talked about at the very beginning of this podcast around controls, security, charts of accounts that are properly organized, accounting software that's properly integrated into their systems. So they have to get ready for that if they want to mature and become, more legitimized in the space. And that's pretty painful. And the sad part is that, and again, accounting is boring. I know it is. And I'm not an accountant, by the way, and nobody wants to talk about it, especially in startup mode. But most of the issues and challenges that these companies see and they have to spend a lot of time and effort and money to fix in order to get audit ready, those things could have been addressed a long time ago when it would have been much cheaper and much easier. So, an ounce of prevention, guys, is the message.
Yeah, I love that. And that's actually a big thought because, Chris, what do you guys kind of tell like companies when you see some company that's kind of maybe struggling with that side of the business? What kind of advice do you have for them to start kind of preparing, start kind of thinking about it, and maybe even for like earlier stage companies as they're kind of beginning. Let's put the right foot forward kind of thing.
Yeah. So I never tell people you have to go out and run out and do this right now, but you need to think about it, right? You need to say to yourself, okay, in our 1, 3, 5-year plan, where do we want to be? And when we get to those stages, what are the things that we're going to have in terms of compliance, controls, regulatory licensing, all that stuff that when we grow up, what do we need to look like from an operational perspective? And it's honestly, and I know things can change. What do they say about battle plans? The first thing that falls apart is the battle plan. But if you just don't put any thought into it, then it becomes a crisis at some point, and those can be avoided.
Yeah, that's well said. Definitely. Any interesting things you see as far as trends on your side that your clients are experiencing, or anything else you want to mention?
Well, it's the consulting answer I gave, which is it depends. So from a crypto perspective, I think it's kind of interesting, as I mentioned earlier, to see what's happening with these ETFs. I think what's going to happen over time is more of the wirehouses will start to accept them. Now, remember, the wirehouses have a process for approving ETFs.
Yeah.
This is nothing new. People don't understand this. This is not specific to crypto. What they want to look at is things like how well does it trade, what's the manager's performance, how do they track relative to their assets or their strategy, whatever you want to call it. Then you layer on all of the controversy around crypto. So I think it's just going to take these firms more time to get there. Right.
Right. Which are a benchmark, all the different things in the 40X space, right? Benchmarking,
right,
all the different things. Yeah.
All that stuff. Right. And that's just going to take time.
Yeah.
But I think we will get there. And that's kind of on the new product side for now. I think on the other side, what we see a lot of is TradFi companies and crypto native and crypto adjacent companies trying to understand what it is they need to do in order to, again, be regulatory compliant. What licenses do I need? How do I get them? How do I operate in that environment? Because it's new to a lot of them, right? We have a digital asset manager that wants a BD license. So, not going to say it's easy, but they have to then imagine, what do we do with that license? So these are all, really interesting challenges that these companies are facing right now, but they're not insurmountable.
Yeah. And to me, what I've kind of gleaned from what you've kind of just mentioned here is you shouldn't go it alone, number one. There's so many things that change so fast. They should have an advocate in their corner to give them competent advice going forward, because things are so much up in the air. To have somebody kind of help them along the path, if you will, of progression of their firm, it's
Right.
real crucial.
Right. And then the other thing that I've said this for years, we have a lot of very, very, very smart people that are, coding and creating things with this technology, but many of them have not thought about the business problem they want to address on the front end. So now they've created something and they're trying to find out where that solution will fit. I always tell them, go the other way. Think about, and we're seeing more and more of this. There's a lot more of this now, where folks identify a challenge, identify a problem, and say, okay, how can we use this technology? So one of the easy ones to think about is charitable donations using crypto, right? So let's start with the donation process and all the things that go into that, the DAFs, the $5,000. If you give something today to a charitable organization over $5,000, you have to have an independent valuation. So let's figure out how to build that valuation into the platform on the front end, so that we're not having to go out and get independent valuations on every single donation down the road.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting. Yeah, that would save a lot of time and effort later
Right.
on.
And there's lots of situations like that. But again, an ounce of prevention, right? Let's think about it up front.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, find the problem before you find a solution.
Right. Exactly.
That's great.
Awesome. Well, Chris, this has been a lot of fun. Anything else in your mind?
No, I guess, maybe we'll talk again after the election and see what's what.
Be great.
I know there's a lot of controversy and excitement around, who's going to be in charge next and what's going to happen to this space. But again, I would just caution people not to get too excited, because no matter what happens, those regulatory agencies still have the same mandates. That's not going to change anytime soon. So all of this is going to be evolutionary, not revolutionary.
I like that. Yeah, it takes time, and yeah, we'll definitely have to have you back on in a couple of months to see where things are at from that perspective, on the regulatory side.
Yeah.
So
That'd be great.
well, Chris, thank you so much for joining us. Where can people go to connect with you and learn more about Eisner?
So you can go to EisnerAmper.com. We have our blockchain and digital assets landing page there. You can find me at chris.brodersen@EisnerAmper.com, or you can find me through LinkedIn.
Awesome. Well, this has been great, Chris, again, and we'll make sure to include all that in the show notes as well.